Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Hi, my name is Sharon Ruggs Hubbard. I'm the owner and principal consultant for OSH Consulting. Can you hear me now? Oh, yeah. For OSH Consulting, your primary and responsible primary resource for drug inventory management and compliance for the practice, for the patient, and for the community. My company focuses on three main business areas. That's medication diversion, which is the theft of medications, medication compounding, which is taking medications from a powder form and making a medication, like eye drops or even pills that you ingest, or taking a liquid from one vial and putting it into a bag of fluid. If you've ever been in the hospital on any unit, you've probably received an IV of some type of medication. And then medication safety, just making sure people have the right access to the right drugs. They're labeled appropriately and stored appropriately. So the problem, everyone in here has guardrails for their life, right? So no matter what they are, you have boundaries for your life. And if you exceed those boundaries, bad things can happen. So the same thing in a hospital. You can have great processes and policies that you're not following. You cannot know what you don't know and don't have a policy in place for things. And you can also just have blind spots in your current processes. And when you do, that can lead to patient death and harm. That can lead to liability, and that can lead to loss of revenue and licensure for a lot of your healthcare entities. So how big a problem is it? Did you know that 15% of nurses have a substance abuse problem, and 10% of active physicians have a substance use disorder or will develop that during their lifetime, during their career? And also about 28,000 patients have contracted a blood-borne pathogen such as hepatitis C due to medication diversion. So case study, something very recently at Cheshire Memorial Hospital in New Hampshire. There was a nurse that stole 8 gallons of fentanyl. Now these aren't in big old gallons, this is just over time. So in the ICU you'll have an IV. She was filtering fentanyl from the IV that was giving it to a patient. And pharmacy didn't have a lot of, they weren't following their policies and processes. The DEA got involved. The CNO lost her license. That nurse ended up dying. They're not going to say it's due to anything that she stole from the hospital, because it may not be. And the pharmacy director almost lost their license. And in addition to that, the DEA almost pulled the license for the hospital. If that would have happened, that hospital would have had to shut down, because if you don't have a DEA license, you can't buy drugs. You can't store drugs. You can't administer drugs. Now a physician can, but what physician do you know is going to take on the liability for an entire hospital? None, not one. And so these are just some current regulatory bodies that can show up to the hospital and that people have to follow, such as your state boards of pharmacy, the FDA, the DEA, USP, and Joint Commission. So not having a silence compliance solution can result in your DEA involvement. And when the DEA comes in, what they do is look at your current processes, and especially if you've had a diversion, they're trying to see what's going on. And if they don't take your license, they can fine you. When they fine you, they usually fine you in the millions of dollars. So that's something that can also impact the bottom line for a hospital. So if they're fining you all this money, your insurance goes up, then you may not be able to have money for other things that you need for your patients in the hospital. And so the solution would be gap assessments and creating medication diversion and compounding programs where needed, and keeping clients updated with regulation changes. Regulations change all the time, and a lot of times what you'll see is people will have something in place for what's now, but they're not keeping up to date what's going on and what's changing, if they're not a part of like a big healthcare company where they have someone that really looks at that. So the solution, breathe life into something that can be painful. When someone comes to audit you, that can be very painful, because you're wondering, what are they going to find? What are they going to ask me? I'm going to keep everything short and simple. You know, you're just trying to minimize the impact of whatever they are. No gotchas, kind of being relatable to everyone. I've worked in many different areas, and so being relatable, no gotchas in my audit tool. So the market would be ambulatory surgery centers, hospitals, physician practices, nursing homes, detox center, compounding pharmacies. And for projected revenue, I almost have my first yes, but just kind of doubling throughout the years. So the go-to market solutions are current organizations, former work relationships and doctors, different associations, speaking engagements, and kind of right now dialing for dollars. So we have competition, which are your supply chain organizations, because they have people that do this, and then versus me, concierge-like service, education versus punitive, and keeping clients up to date with regulations changes. And the model would be The pricing is determined based on services provided and travel expenses, the client's beds and service lines, and just customizable solutions depending on what they need. And then I have over 15 years experience in regulatory healthcare compliance, worked in one of the largest healthcare systems, and worked for one of the United States' largest supply chain organizations. Okay.
So, as you probably know, 15 to 20 years ago, hospitals were killing on average 2.8 people per year, right? Each of those deaths are somewhere between 10 and 25 million a pop, which can't keep hospitals in business. They changed their business practices and monitoring the medication that goes from cabinet to the patient. But help me understand, you're doing an audit of their processes? Is that the consultancy? So are you doing both audit of processes and then revenue generation related to the medication?
Audit their current practices and processes related to medication. So, looking at the medications that are brought in, where they're stored, how they're distributed, how they're dispensed, where they're dispensed to, who has access to it. That's a big thing. A lot of time there are settings in your automatic dispensing cabinets where you see nurses get medications from, and the wrong people have access to those medications. When they dispense those medications, the timing, because sometimes patients are still active in a system after they've been discharged, and people will go and, grab medications from it and divert that way. Also looking in your OR, in your procedural areas, that is the highest area for theft or diversion. So what are those? Are you storing medications and controlling them appropriately? Also, from the revenue generation point, you can look at the DEA and see what their fines are. Different boards of pharmacy have different fines. I used to live in Virginia. They fine you for everything. But then you go to another state where they don't fine you for anything. So
just one follow-up. So are you focused on hospitals or are you focused on pharmacies or both?
Hospitals, the entire hospital as a whole. In your infusion center. So for compounding pharmacies, it's just a pharmacy. They compound drugs and send them to the hospitals, if they need it. Because there's certain type of compounding you don't do in a hospital setting. Because you can't. You don't have the right equipment to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Sharon, how are you?
All right, and you?
Good, great presentation. Going to your projections and then looking at your team, and I don't know if you were hoping to get there. However,
I was.
Your projections are pretty lofty for a sole, like you're just providing the services.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your recruitment strategy for employees in order to reach those projections and have a team that can go in and do an entire audit of an entire hospital?
Well, it depends. So if it's a smaller hospital, actually I can do that myself. In my last job, that's what and even large hospitals. So I was in charge of pharmacy operations for 19 hospitals over 4 states, from small to large. And so if I had to do a larger hospital, it usually took me a day to 2 days. Well, it took me a day and a half to 2 days to do it, depending on their number of service lines. If it was a smaller hospital, I could do it in a day, and I was doing it by myself. And so depending on the number of people or contracts that I do have an automated dispensing specialist that I can contract out, as well as another medication diversion technician that I can contract out that can help me cipher through the data if I need that for that piece. But as far as the on-site part, I would do that because I just know where to look, know how to ask the questions, and know what to do.